we prepare our children for a future of AI? What kind of jobs will they have? What kind of skills do they need to develop? What should we be doing right now when they start using ChatGPT for their homework? How does AI shape the future? And how do we as parents raise children who are ready for that future? Welcome back to hifam. I'm Avital, and I am so thrilled and honored to introduce you to someone who is not only an expert in this subject, dedicating his life's work and building a non-for-profit all about the future of AI and how we can protect ourselves from the dystopian sides while maximizing the utopian potential, but is also my older brother, Daniel Shreiber. Daniel is the CEO of Lemonade, an insurance company that has been utilizing AI for the last decade. And he's also a father of 3 and a grandfather of 2. He's also one of my own personal cheerleaders and role models. And I love him so much, and I'm so thrilled to be able to share him with you, my wonderful hifam audience. What you're about to hear in this conversation is, I think, critical for all parents. It's essential that we understand what's coming down the pipeline. When I polled my audience, about 20% of you said you had never even touched any AI, not played around with ChatGPT. And the other 80% said that they used it a little bit here and there for meal planning or for emails, but they haven't actually incorporated it into their parenting in any kind of way and aren't sure about the future. Concerns about kids not really learning, about it dumbing us down, about it replacing all of us in our jobs were prevalent amongst my audience members as well, which makes perfect sense seeing as we are shaping the future. Daniel is about to break all of this down for us, give us cause for concern, but also reasons to hope and practical advice about what we can and should be focusing on inside our homes. Remember, my tagline here is that meaning begins at home. And I think this conversation is highly relevant to that. Enjoy. Daniel Shreiber, welcome to hifam.
Wonderful to be with you.
Thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're a very busy man. And part of what makes you so busy is that you are on a mission regarding AI, artificial intelligence. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. It's kind of a dual mission because I have a couple of different hats that I wear. One is just my job. I'm a manager at a company called Lemonade, which is an insurance company built on AI. It's very fashionable today to talk about AI, but we founded the company in 2015 with that as the mission. And in that capacity, I drive relentlessly and with tremendous excitement for adoption of AI with really some pretty stunning results. So, for example, the company in the last couple of years has seen its gross profit grow 3-fold, while our headcount, number of employees that we have in the company, has actually contracted 2 years in a row. Now, we're fortunate it's kind of natural attrition. We haven't had layoffs. But just the mere fact that the company could grow so dramatically with fewer and fewer people tells you something about the enormous power and the displacement power that AI brings to the table. And that's kind of one. So professionally, I'm an adopter, a champion of, an optimist, an excitable character when it comes to AI. But then as a citizen, as a parent, as a grandparent, I see where all of that leads and I'm concerned. And so I'm also working with a nonprofit to try and think through what are the appropriate policy responses. How do we make sure that all of this yields or leads us to a better outcome? So those are the kind of two sides of the AI coin and two sides of my day, if you like.
Right. Fascinating. So I feel that very much in my own little life as well. I wrote a book, I guess it was 2021 that I started writing that book, and I had about 4 or 5 different people working for me, helping me with the book, whether it was editing or research assistants, etc. And now I'm writing again, and I just find that I don't necessarily need those people again because I have AI and it's almost free and it's very quick and easy and really, really incredible, powerful. Not always as accurate as human beings in everything yet, but I can see the displacement power there. I can also see that as creatives or as a CEO, etc., it's really truly beneficial. And then there's the fear side of it and the fact that it's displacing jobs, etc. So I want to zero in on the angle of your personal life and your concerns about AI, because I think anyone who's touched it, anyone who plays with it, anyone who uses it for work sees its possibilities and all of the incredible things it brings. All of the positives basically are, I think, quite obvious. Although let's discuss those too. But let's first bring on our doomsday hat. You're a grandpa of 2, you're a father of 3. I know and love your family very dearly. And what is the type of concerns that you have as you look to your grandchildren growing up in this world? You know, your kids were already basically adults when AI burst onto the scene as it has. What are your concerns as a grandparent?
Well, I'll even start as a parent because my kids are of college age, just after, just before, one's about to begin. And the pressing question is what degree that you can start now will be relevant in 4 years when you graduate. And if that sounds melodramatic, our middle son is beginning a data science computing degree. My VP of engineering is telling me that within a couple of years, he's not expecting to hire any university graduates for coding. He just thinks that that first rung of the ladder will be taken over by AI. And then it's okay, well, maybe that's coding. And we've seen the CEO of NVIDIA, the largest AI chip company in the world, telling people stop learning coding. We see companies like Google say that already about a quarter of their code is written by AI. Salesforce.com just announced that they're not hiring more people because of the same forces at play. So I do think it's still a little bit early. We're not seeing the full impact. This is getting better by the day. But you play the movie forward and you do wonder what degree that you could start today would be immune and would survive the test of time of just 5 years.
Right.
Now you play that forward to 15 years or 20 years and to young children and you say, what skills should I instill? What schooling should they have? And the question I think is both harder and easier. Easier because we've got longer to figure it out. They're not going into the workforce tomorrow. Harder because projecting this movie forward that many years becomes very difficult. But I do want to say, I'm quite convinced that the changes are bordering on the unimaginable. I think that they are different, qualitatively different to anything that has happened within living memory and perhaps for many, many centuries. I do think this is a sea change at a pace that humanity hasn't known in an extent that we haven't been exposed to. I don't think it's necessarily bad. Like all forceful inventions or tremendous energetic releases of one kind or another, they can be forces for good and forces for bad. For me, this has many, many layers. We're going to have a real epidemic of fake news. If you think it's bad now, just wait. It's going to be very hard to discern what's real in the world and what isn't. Politics may become even more marred and more problematic than it is today. But for me, the epicenter and the thing that I'm most focused on is employment. I'm of the view that there is no empirical or theoretical reason to believe that there is anything that you can do with neurons firing in your brain that you won't soon, and I do mean soon, be able to do with neurons firing on a piece of silicon or in the cloud, if you like. And therefore, any job that you can do on Zoom, including what we're doing right now, AI will be able to do for a fraction of the cost, quicker, faster, without bio breaks or anything else. And that applies to every profession. Now, as we chat, I'll try and explain why I don't think that must lead to dystopia and what skills can perhaps show some immunity or relatively.
Right.
But that's what preoccupies me.
Okay, so pause on what skills we can develop because we all want to get there, but just linger on the dystopia for a moment. I think anyone who's messed around with AI can understand that it can replace things like editing a book. Okay, for better, for better or worse, eventually it's going to overtake people in that. And you've already said CEOs are saying don't study coding. Okay, anything in that realm, I think we can also kind of understand. Maybe it's going to design our websites for us. It's going to design apps for us. It can do all of those types of models and skills. But I think most people hear that and they think, yeah, but it's not coming from my job, right? Because I work with people, because I work with feelings, because I work with creativity, with art. Maybe I'm a teacher or a psychologist, or I write new ideas that a computer can't come up with for a living, or any number of other professions. So when you say it's a massive sea change, it's going to be either catastrophic or maybe utopian or whatever it's going to be, but very, very dramatic. And I've heard you say before that it's even bigger than revolutions we know about in the past that completely changed the world, like the Industrial Revolution, which I think is the quickest kind of metaphor that most of us have to apply here, or the model that we know. And, it's not within living memory, but it's within quite recent history, and we know how it shaped the world. How is this so different? Why aren't we going to just adjust and everything will kind of carry on like normal, but more computers will do more things for more people? Why is it so dramatic?
Predicting the future is a tough business. And so it may be that I'm short-sighted. Certainly if you'd spoken to the laggards in the 1800s, and said to them, don't worry, your jobs are going to disappear, but your descendants are going to be Java programmers or podcasters or social media experts, they wouldn't understand the language, it would be meaningless, and yet the jobs materialize and they're better jobs and they pay better and they don't break as many backs. So that is our go-to metaphor. I draw a different conclusion from the Industrial Revolution along a couple of angles. In 1790, I think it was, that America had its first census. 90%, of the population identified as farmers. Mm-hmm. Today, that number is 1.3%, I think. So close to 99% of the farming jobs vanished. So let's just focus on that before we talk about the Java programmers and everything else. One of the stark lessons from the Industrial Revolution is that all businesses will displace people with machines if there's a buck to be made. We have zero record of anybody standing in the breach and saying, no, I want to plow the field with my hands or with my donkey. Keep that carbon harvester to yourself. I'm going to keep going the way I always did. Mm. And anybody who tried that failed because they were outcompeted by people who took the tractor and got the work done. 99% of those jobs disappeared and they are not coming back. So while there is a lot to say about other jobs that we developed, I'll come to that in a second. We have to pause and just acknowledge that when machines do jobs better than people, the job disappears. And sometimes there are some areas where we resist. In the 1930s, I think it was, there were tens of thousands of people in America who belonged to the union of elevator operators. Mm. The folks who'd come in, they'd close the door, they'd press the button. At some point in the negotiations over their salary, the union decided we're going to strike. And the technology to go in an elevator without a person, just pressing the button, existed. After all, that's what the operator did.
Right.
But people felt uncomfortable trusting the machine to drive them to floor 32. They wanted the professional to drive them. They went on strike 2 days or so after people had to walk up 102 flights in the Empire State Building. People said, done with that. We're going to press the button ourselves. And the entire profession disappeared. So I guess that's my first lesson, is resistance is futile. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it takes a bit longer. Sometimes maybe there'll be some decades. Human behavior is much harder to predict than technological progress. So some areas where we might feel uncomfortable, we'll come to psychologists in a second. But by and large, lawyer, accountant, doctor, dietitian, so many other areas where a big chunk of the population is currently gainfully employed may suffer massive displacement.
It's just at the hands of the market. It's not something that governments can protect us from, or that, it's not going to come from the goodness of CEOs' hearts type of thing. If a job can be replaced, it will be replaced. And now the prediction is about which jobs could be replaced.
I think that has to be the sensible conclusion, and be prepared to be surprised that it's different. Yeah. Right. And we do see in some areas in the medical profession, heavily regulated professions, you'll see breaks being applied by regulators. Heavily unionized professions, you'll see the union slow down progression. So maybe instead of taking 5 years, it takes 15, 20. But think about something as creative as the Hollywood strike that took place last year. For months, they went out on strike. The writers, some of the actors, we won't be displaced by AI because AI can write a script, AI can act, you can do video generated by AI these days. I wonder if that's an empty victory. Because sure, okay, so Hollywood will now continue to employ expensive people. But some team of 3 people in Silicon Valley are going to set up a competition to Hollywood. They'll produce movies in 3 days instead of 3 months or 3 years. It'll cost them $50 instead of $50 million. And yes, they've delayed and they've got another few years, but you can see how then, if you're not going to do it yourself, you're going to be displaced. The company, the corporation, the enterprise will be displaced by other people. One more thing about the Industrial Revolution. We tend to romanticize it. It was great. The machines replaced us and we went off to be, intellectual pursuit and it was fabulous. A lot of entry of women into the workplace was because it was no longer about brawn, it was about brain. So many good things ensued. True in the end. Mm. People tend to forget that a lot of terrible things, what a terrible time. First of all, loads of people did lose their livelihood, and it was an entire generation who suffered horrible hardship. Yet these massive population shifts of people moving from the periphery into the cities in order to be taken into workforces in factories, which changed the societal dynamics in ways that were not all good by any stretch of the imagination. You had global forces, the Europeans going and colonizing much of the world in order to get raw materials needed in order to feed those factories. You could say much the same about the American slave trade. And where was that cotton going? It was going to Manchester, where the mills would turn it into products. There were wars that broke out with tens of millions of people dead as a result of those wars. So you had a century of hardship. The story may have a happy ending, but it doesn't even want to take our kids to see that movie again.
It's also had a massive impact on the family, because families used to be, homesteaders, and they used to run their farm. And suddenly it completely changed the whole structure, with children going off to school to become factory workers. And it kind of, in a way, dismantled that organic holistic unit, which a lot of people are actually trying to return to today, there's a big homesteading movement and people trying to live off the land again. And it's very hard kind of to wind back the clock, but it's interesting. Okay, so go on. So the Industrial Revolution was not as romantic and easy as we might think it was. But coming back to AI, if I'm sitting here listening to this and I'm thinking, okay, but it's not going to really replace all of our jobs. I'm not a farmer in the Industrial Revolution. I'm now a creative, some kind of job based on empathy, a caregiver, a nurturer, those types of things. How is that going to now impact us today? I understand that you can't predict the future, but what's the trend showing us?
So I guess I reject the premise of the question. Let me kind of delve into that. The Industrial Revolution had, we said, a difficult middle, but a happy ending. The question is, do we get to the happy ending this time? And I'd argue that the reason there was a happy ending there is because the machines displaced us as farmers. It just did that. But we were able to find that since all the machines were dumb as a doornail, you needed brains in order to manage those operations. And there was this division between machine that did the brawn and the brain was human. And the more machines you had that were brainless, the more smart brains we needed to be managers, to be planners, to invent new machines. So actually, the arrival of dumb mass machines spurred huge demand for smart brains. We had an exclusive dominion when it came to intelligence. Mm-hmm. Only humans could provide those smart brains.
So it made a lot of jobs.
It created tons of jobs. And if you kind of think about a diagram where you say, what were the human capabilities, what the machine's capabilities, there was some overlap in farming. But there was huge domains where humans could do stuff and the machines just couldn't. So that's great. Demand for that flourished. What's been happening as technology grows, it doesn't shrink. It moves at an exponential pace. We're developing it at an evolutionary pace, which basically means we're standing still. And therefore, the overlap becomes greater and greater and greater. And just drawing solace from the past, where it was like this, for the future, when it will look like this, I think is not a logical thing to do. It's tempting. The boy who cried wolf, they've said this before. At the end, the boy gets eaten by the wolf. It doesn't have a happy ending. People forget that.
Right.
The wolf actually arrives at some point. So I think we have to look realistically at this and say, what are the areas of human endeavor that machines will not be able to do? Maybe we'll come to robotics in a second. We'll talk about physical stuff, but just staying in the intellectual domain. I can't point to a single area. I think machines can both understand and display emotions very, very well. An oncologist just sent me a preprint of some paper that's going to come out in Nature magazine, where this is quite old now. They took Claude 1 and 2, we're on 3.5 and moving forward. And they gave it the opportunity to interact with oncology patients, cancer patients. And they also had oncologists, 15 years, 20 years training oncologists, each one of them answering the cancer patients' questions. And the test was who satisfied you, not just in terms of intellectual answers to medical questions, but who emotionally was more helpful, who was more empathic. The real test was empathy. The GPTs and the Claudes from a year and a half ago smashed the doctors on this test.
I'm not surprised when it comes to doctors. Although I will say I have had personal experience with this. I had a crazy personal experience with this just a few weeks ago. I've received some really bad news. I've really sunk into a deep funk. I was in a very dark place in my mind. And I felt like, I kind of really need help with this. And I called my best friend, who happens to be a psychologist as well. And normally, we bounce off each other and we support each other. And she was busy. And I opened ChatGPT and I said, I'm in a really dark place. I'm having really hard thoughts. I need some help with this. And it was incredible. It goes, gosh, I'm so sorry, Abital. That sounds so tough, what you're going through. Would you like some help reframing that? Yes, please. here are some new ways of looking at it, helping me with my mindset. It was incredible. But a few minutes later, my friend called me back. And then I had this conversation with her, and she's amazing. She's amazing at what she does. I think she was easily just as good, but it wasn't obvious to me that she was better. She was better because I love her and she's a real human and I feel the connection. But just in terms of the actual therapeutic process that it took me through of reframing my thoughts, of offering me new ways of looking at things, mindset coaching, which is something that I do for a profession, I was just really blown away by the power. I really was.
I think you're right. And there's a few things that we learn from here. One, AI is as dumb as it's ever going to be, right? It's only getting better. The model launched a couple of days ago that I've been using, which is mind-blowing. So if it's already on par with your friend, the second thing is your friend wasn't available.
That's true. Right. And if my friend, even if I didn't have a friend, not everyone has an amazing friend to call, but you would have to pay for a psychologist. You would have to find a time to meet them. This was anonymous. It was immediate. Sure. I could erase the conversation afterwards if I didn't want it, lingering. It was really, there was a lot of pros to it.
Yeah. So
I felt a bit silly talking to a machine about my feelings, but it was helpful.
And so we get over that as well, right?
Right.
This is just an adaptation. And, I'm married to a psychologist.
Yeah.
And I have these conversations, and she's come 180 degrees from saying, I will never be able to do what I do. My gosh, it's actually pretty good, kind of your kind of response.
And you can tell it, like, I want you to give me CBT.
Absolutely.
I don't want just empathy. I want help. I want mindset reframing, whatever. You can tell it what to give you.
We're beginning to see articles come out about people falling in love with AIs.
This is terrible.
Meaningful relationships with AIs. It's very disturbing. Very disturbing.
It is.
And, I think that the bar actually for getting human interactions is much lower than we want to believe. I have an electric toothbrush. If I brush for less than a minute, it does a sad face. Between 1 and 2 minutes, it does a kind of okay face. And above 2 minutes, it has a happy face.
It's happy with you.
I try to make it happy every night.
You want to please it.
Yeah, like if I'm a minute 50 into brushing my teeth, I'll go the 2 minutes.
Just to get the happy face.
Because to get the happy face,
Yeah.
So
Wow.
I remember back in the 90s, 80s maybe even, somebody did a test with not AI. It was a psychologist kind of computer program. I think it only had 2 or 3 responses, no matter what you said. Yeah. How does that make you feel? Tell me more. And one other thing like that. People felt better after talking to it.
It helped.
But listen, I'm feeling this. Oh, tell me more. We're not as sophisticated as we wish we were.
Wow. And you know what else is true is that people don't have as much human connection as they used to have. It's actually, in a way, much more expensive than it used to be. It's harder. People aren't as connected to their communities, to their neighborhoods. People are getting married less and later. And a lot of people are truly lonely. So not only is the AI becoming more human, but human connection is becoming rarer and harder to, in some societies, in many. So that's also true. Wow. Okay. But tell me a bit more about that disturbing side. I don't know why I'm okay with me getting therapy on AI, but someone falling in love with AI, it's upsetting to hear that in a way. I know that people have been marrying anime characters for a while, but there's something there that does feel lost to me, in a significant way.
I think these are some of the challenges we're going to have, is recognizing that there is an entity that is intelligent in the world that isn't human. And it's quite alien. It was there mimicking a psychologist when you were chatting to it. But it thinks in ways that are quite alien to us. And that's also when we come to kind of what skills can we impart and how can we, if not outmaneuver it, to some extent outcompete it in the marketplace. We'll want to identify what it can do and what we can't do. But the ease with which we are fooled by a stupid icon on a toothbrush should set off alarm bells. And I'm not even applying judgment. Like, maybe somebody who is sufficiently lonely is better off with an AI friend than no one. We're fine with pets. Why is a dog profoundly different? It's a sentient being. I'm not attaching sentience to an AI. But in terms of what I get out of it, and certainly as kids and sometimes as adults, we'll have a doll or other objects that we don't pretend is sentient, and yet it gives us we get something from the relationship with it. Or with art, or there are books. There are various things that we can have relationships of different kinds with. And I wouldn't absolutely preclude or necessarily stigmatize a relationship with an AI. And yet I share your immediate aversion. But I, like everybody else, is going to have to contend with these issues and explore them more fully over time.
Right. To wrestle through them. Right. And I do want to sharpen what you just said. You're not attaching sentience to it. It can perform emotion, right? But not feel emotion. Maybe that's potentially the difference that we feel between an animal and AI. Although, like you say, you can really feel an emotional connection to a book, which obviously doesn't have sentience.
Philosophers have long since discussed this question. I know that I have sentience, and I think, therefore, I am, to be Descartesian for a second. I can't prove to myself that you exist at all. Maybe a figment of my imagination, and I certainly can't prove that you have an internal process that feels like my internal process, but I have no problem believing that and attributing it to you. Since we don't truly understand consciousness at a scientific level, I don't like getting drawn into the question, will machines ever be conscious? And we can't explain it on humans. How can we answer that question? But I tend to think that the answer is no. And I also think to some extent at this stage, it doesn't really matter, because we will probably attribute or behave to it as if it has sentience. In other words, I find myself not being rude to my GPT.
Me too. Please, thank you.
Yes. So I can explain it as just, I want to preserve the human in me.
Right.
And yet, I wouldn't say that to a stone.
Right.
So I think to some extent, if I feel like somebody was helping you, chatting to you, give it, cheers, thanks.
Yeah. So, also, when they think of the world, then they won't come for us because we were nice to it, right?
But I'm your overlord.
Yeah.
Decades ago, there was this stupid little toy called a Tamagotchi, I think it was called.
Yes, I had one.
You had one of
those? I did, yes. Yeah.
So tell me if this is your experience. But they were little keychains.
Yeah.
The lowest tech as tech could be, with these stupid little screens, black and white, a few pixels, nothing else. And you had to feed them.
Yes.
And if you didn't feed, and you fed them by pressing a button.
Yeah.
And if you failed to feed them too many times, they would die.
They died. It was terrible. Yeah.
Friends of mine would skip school because they'd forgotten to feed their Tamagotchi. It caused them distress.
Yeah.
And again, that just goes to show if something as evidently not human and nobody thought it was sentient, and yet it triggered things within us that evolved in the pre-technology era. So yeah, we're suckers when it comes to
right. Because anything that can mimic an evolutionary impulse is going to get us. Like your toothbrush smiling at you, even though your prefrontal cortex can say that it's just a machine, but your amygdala or hippocampus or whatever is saying no, it's smiling at me, so it's rewarding me. Okay, so tell me then, what can we hope for? What should we? Parents are listening to this and they're thinking, oh my goodness, so, I think it's already a time when people are very anxious about bringing kids into the world, whether it was climate alarms or other reasons, feeling like there are wars and there's uncertainty and recessions and inflation and all political polarization and all sorts of things that I hear from parents every single day, being like, what kind of world are we bringing our kids into? How can I equip my kids for the future? And then when you talk about the entire economy transforming so dramatically. I mean, when I was growing up, there was really quite a clear path for how your kid would succeed. If you do okay in school, if you get at least a degree, any degree, right, then you'll find a job. And then when you have your job, you'll be able to work your way up. Already in my generation, I see that people don't hold on to jobs for that long. There's quite a lot of turnover. 2 or 3 years in a job, you're considered like, wow, you really hung in there a long time. And people are also kind of veering more into being jacks of all trades versus vertical speciality. They might have a side hustle. Maybe they do something creative on Instagram, but they also have a day job in a hospital or, those kinds of things. So those are the trends that I've been seeing, in the millennial, I guess, generation. What's coming down the pipeline and how do we prepare our kids for this? Because my 13-year-old is already, asking me about using ChatGPT for writing his schoolwork. Oh, I'll just ask ChatGPT everything when, of course, we used to have to use a dictionary and then no one uses dictionary and when you use Google, you're not even Googling and reading an article now. You're just asking ChatGPT. We don't even know how accurate all this information is. I asked my audience about AI and one of them was saying, I'm very nervous about population control through AI. If my kids are getting all that information from this, who's controlling that information? Where's it come from? It's not diversified. So lots and lots and lots of concerns. But I think if I had to put it all under one umbrella, is just preparation for the future. How do you raise a kid? What kind of skills do you focus on? It used to be pretty, classic academic skills that we all grew up on. What are the skills that you need now? If they can even take over in the realm of being very human and empathic and being very creative, what do we do with ourselves? What are they supposed to do all day to get ready?
Let's talk about a few things here. I do think there's a decent chance that in the coming years, decades, we're going for a period of growing unemployment and irreversible unemployment. I think this may be the new normal.
Which is petrifying when you say that.
Yes. I'll dial back the fear factor in a second. But I think that is, if we're going to look at reality in the face, we have to acknowledge that things that humans do in terms of things that we will pay humans to do that machines cannot do, that delta is shrinking daily. So I'm sure that a doula assisting in a birth won't be a robot anytime soon. But the cleaning person in your house, quite possibly, the lawyer, the accountant, the physician, the person drawing blood, no, but the person looking at the analysis of the blood results, yes. I just think there is huge swaths of the economy that will be done better, faster, cheaper by AI pretty quickly. And maybe there's this other beautiful array of professions waiting around the corner, and this is a failure of my imagination. I don't rule that out. But until I see that materialize, I'm not prepared to bank on it. And I don't think this is copy-paste for the Industrial Revolution for reasons that we've already said. Just that the remaining domains in which we can perform and machines can't is shrinking daily. Now, that doesn't have to be dystopian. There are visions, and we need to develop these visions for a world in which labor, in order to sustain ourselves, is not a central plank. There are ancient visions. Utopia is actually based on a book by Thomas More in 1516 about people living in an island and how they managed. That's where the word comes from. But 500 years before that, Maimonides wrote that in the end of days, he loved labor, he loved work. But he thought that a time will come, and he did not think this would be magical. I don't know how he thought this was going to play out, but he thought that natural progression would be such that the time will come that with little to no labor, we'll be able to live an abundant life. And that vision seems to be credible suddenly. That suddenly looks not a ridiculous notion. Star Trek has this philosophy, forget the star hopping aspect of it, but that there's abundance, and what we use our time for is not to earn a living, but to satisfy curiosity, to help, to have family lives that are more meaningful. So if you took out not only the job, but the worry about where will food come from, if they both could disappear, and they conceivably could both disappear, then you're entering a different question of how do I want to spend my time? And as much as we are worried about our kids, I think there's a lot to learn from our kids. Children, by and large, spend their time without worrying about providing a living. And yet they're not time wasters. They are in pursuit of growth, of knowledge, of interactions. I think we can learn a lesson from a lot of our elderly who, again, are not thinking about earning a living, but spend lives full of meaning and social interactions and volunteering. We can learn a lot from stay-at-home parents who, again, are not focused on earning a paycheck, but on living a fulfilling life through giving and nurturing. So I do think we have examples of people and stages in our life cycles where we're not thinking about how do we earn a living. Now, how can you get to a future where earning a living isn't a preoccupation? I think the economics of it work quite easily. If overnight, today, AI replaced all of us, that sounds so startling, but actually going to the extreme helps figure this out. Tomorrow you'd get up and everything would work. You'd go to the local market and there would be fruit because the robots would have picked it in the field, and you call up your lawyer and an AI answers very quickly, like we said, no delays, and helps you instantaneously with very high level of professional service. And the same is true for your accountant. And when you feel unwell, your AI doctor solves everything, and the AI flies the plane and drives the car. It's happening already. And actually, it would be a very interesting kind of mass or total unemployment because there wouldn't be scarcity. We think of jobs disappear, there's scarcity. This would be something unknown in human history, which is total unemployment and abundance. Everything would be there. You wouldn't get a paycheck, but if society functioned properly and all of that abundance was given out in some fair fashion, I'm interested in things like universal basic income and other structures as a way to say, well, one second, in that future, we don't want just Elon Musk to have all of that. We want everyone to participate in that. I think there's already policy decisions about how should it all be distributed. And ironically, Elon Musk would have an interest in all of us having some money. He's very pro-universal basic income because he wants people to be able to buy all the stuff that he makes. So there may be a path forward economically. Coming back to our kids, I think, first of all, let's not be petrified of that future. I actually think instilling in them an optimism about it is an important part of what we need to inculcate into them. You may be petrified, but for them, this is the new world. And I think an optimism about it is important because if we instill fear into them, that will not prepare them well for it. They won't embrace it. The resilience won't be there. So I do think cultivating an optimistic attitude is important. I think parents need to stay informed. For too many people, this is something they're vaguely aware of. They read an article in some magazine. I think our kids need to be consumers of these technologies. So you said before about your kids in school. Today, the system doesn't work well. All the children are giving ChatGPT the task and they're writing the essay. And all the teachers or professors are just having GPT mark the essay. It's GPT talking to GPT. Nobody's learning anything.
That's so true. That's so true.
But we could adapt that, right? There's no reason why we wouldn't ask kids to present verbally. I do think that in terms of skills to inculcate, we'll want to have a lot more of a debate style skill set. I think critical thinking and statistics at its core has been for some years hugely important and will just become more important. There'll be so much nonsense out there, and the ability to be a critical thinker, identify sources, something is presented to you, to be able to question it and push back on it. And I think debate societies and critical thinking and also mathematical or basic statistical tools to evaluate, oh, you heard something, how likely is that to be true? Even if it's true, does that radiate out to the rest of my life? Or is that a one-off freak thing and I can discount it? And that kind of critical thinking and statistical thinking and debating kind of styles, I think those will be hugely important. So I'll bucket that as one skill set that I would prioritize. Another one that I would prioritize is entrepreneurship. And I don't mean startups necessarily. I mean drive, ambition. One of the things I said before, that AIs are different. They're an alien intelligence, but at least the way they've been built today, they are great servants. You tell them what they want and they will do it for you. They are, the sorcerer's apprentice. They'll just go off and do the task very, very well, including intellectual work, PhD level work. But they don't care if the work gets done or not. They don't have desire.
They don't initiate anything. Is that
right?
They
don't initiate today. We might ask them to initiate, but they are without will. They didn't have millions of years of evolution making them strive for something, or else they would die. And dying doesn't bother them. In fact, the whole word bother doesn't apply to them. So they are different. And I think that people will be more valuable in whatever jobs remain or in societal functions, whether they're jobs or not, who are initiators, drivers, drive for themselves. And by extension, the other kind of the word cloud for me includes things like leadership and human skills and the ability to motivate. I put storytelling within that word cloud. So I think a lot of people who will stand out are people who will be able to initiate and drive. And one of the amazing things about AI is it gives us just stunning amounts of agency. If you have desires to achieve something, to change something, to create something today, you can do much of that without another human being on your payroll. We are all kind of superhuman. We've got these Iron Man suits around us with technology that just says, hey, Jarvis, write me this. I don't know how to code. You don't need to know how to code. I don't understand law. You don't need the law. You've got a lawyer, I've got an accountant, I've got all these things for $20 a month.
Right.
So I think that people who have ambition, drive, ambition not in the crude
vision, right?
Vision,
a vision
who care, who want to be effective in the world. I think those are also good skills to inculcate. I think a lot of offline skills. I think some of the work that Jonathan Haidt is doing about getting phones out of schools is cardinally important today, but will only become more so.
So 1 minute, you said a few minutes ago that the kids should learn these skills. They should engage with the technology. And now you're mentioning Jonathan Haidt and that we should get this quote out of the school. So
I think both are true.
Yeah.
I definitely am with all the difficulties and trade-offs, I'm definitely for making a friend of your AI.
Okay. So that means letting kids play with it, learn it, use it, that type of thing?
In a few ways. Let's delay for a second on education.
Okay.
I do think parents need to ask themselves the question, why do we educate ourselves or our children? And by and large, it will fall into two buckets of answers. One is to impart skills so that they can get a job and be successful along that trajectory. And the other one is to make them richer in the other currency, just fuller human beings, more knowledgeable, smarter, better partners, better parents, better citizens, an informed citizenry, that kind of line of reasoning. The second one won't lose any of its relevance. It might gain tremendous relevance because we may have more leisure and more time to pursue interests, and inculcating curiosity into our children and a desire for knowledge as an end in itself, without necessarily making it a utility towards getting a job. So quite aside from the job future, just that has got to be a fabulous gift to give them in whatever constellation we find ourselves in 5, 10, 15, 20 years' time. Then in terms of the practical applications, and even there, AI is massively important. There was just a study found that some kids in relatively poor African village were given access to one of the AIs, and they learned in, I think it was 6 weeks, what usually takes 2 years to learn. High quality education you can really get. An AI can teach kids at their pace. The vision of truly personalized tutorage is available to us now in whatever subject they find curious. It can test them. It can give them tasks. It can engage with them. It can really be an outstanding tutor and just an enricher in whatever form or fashion the parent thinks best. But just focusing on the utilitarian aspect of it, if you're trying to be a whatever, fill in the blank, psychologist, dietitian, blogger, or whatever it is, and you're not using AI and your competitor is, you will lose. You're the farmer who's trying to plow the field with a shovel. And other people will just be faster and have better quality, and they'll customize it more, and they'll just be able to achieve more. Yeah. So I don't think there's going to be, mathematicians who today don't use a calculator don't get more jobs because they say, I want to do it by hand. They get fewer jobs. I think to the extent that we want to have impactful human beings out of our children, we have to encourage them. The wave is coming. Are you going to be washed over by it? Or are you going to take a board and ride it? And I think riding it means making a friend of the technology and being the best fill in the blank as possible, because I can do it 100 times better, faster, cheaper than the person who's decided to take the other path. So I do think no employer will pay a dime extra for somebody who's saying, not no one, already now will pay somebody who was hand knitted in this jungle by somebody we find, but the number of things for which we'll pay a premium because it was done by hand by somebody who doesn't know how to use AI is going to be vanishingly small.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so they need to use it and learn it and be in the real world with the AI. But then they also need to develop themselves without it. And that's kind of hard when it's in the room. Like when I know that, when the phone is there, you have a conversation, and as soon as someone disagrees, well, let's check. Well, let's Google it. Let's, there's some kind of, it becomes a crutch, right? There's some kind of dependency on the machine for interpersonal relationships, or even just we're using it all the time. Okay, we'll get the recipe. We'll watch a video how to do it, etc. So I think sometimes it's just really useful watching a video how to fix something instead of spending 4 hours trying to do it yourself. Okay, fine. But sometimes it becomes an impediment to that critical thinking you were talking about, to your ability to reason yourself without the use of the machine. We take the weekends tech-free, and I find that to be one of the ways that I like to protect my kids from screen addiction or from the inability to disconnect, because they do have to play an old-fashioned board game or have a conversation with someone and look in their eyes and not be distracted by other things. And I think that's one way of doing it. Talk to me a little bit about that balance and about developing kids who have, you mentioned a lot of things like being interesting people just for the sake of life, right? Of life experience, of quality of life, quality of relationships, being nurturers, being storytellers, being curious about the world, learning for the pleasure of learning, and because it makes you a better rounded, more interesting person. And because it makes you that visionary you spoke about, who can then utilize the AI skills in building something new that AI didn't come up with from its own volition. So talk to me a bit about, you said about the side where you dive in and you ride the wave. What about the side where you pull back from that wave?
I think you probably can cover this much better than I can. I mentioned Jonathan Haidt because we're beginning to see some studies, nothing surprising,
right?
Kind of obvious, at least in retrospect, but I think even in prospect, but that when you take smartphones out of the school, break time becomes different. I think
shocking. Right.
Asking a child or a parent to resist having a phone on them, asking parents to equip their kids to resist that, is mission impossible. Schools should just say no smartphones at all, certainly not during break time. I think at all would be a better thing.
Totally agree.
Then you're having big chunks of the day, kids spend a lot of time in school when there are no phones available to them. And if there's no phone available to them, suddenly they understand how to have discourse, how to have an argument, how to recover from an argument, how to play ball, how to knit, how to do whatever it is that they take learn a musical instrument, whatever it's going to be. So I do think taking big chunks of time when there's no technology at your fingertips. Now, maybe that when you go back into class time, there's a screen or you have a phone or you're being taught how to solve algebra using that doesn't bother me so much, so long as there are real spaces and times which are carved out from that.
Right. So it basically comes back to balance, which is something that is So true for so many things. Dan, thank you so much for your time here. I want to end just with one last question here about family. You mentioned stay-at-home parents, the elderly, young children as good examples of people who have meaningful lives without being gainfully employed. I don't know if it's since the beginning of time or in the last few centuries, for so many people, their job is their identity. And I think a lot of what happened with feminism, at least in the later waves of feminism, was that women were also kind of taught to put their careers first, and that should be their main way of developing themselves, and that family would be secondary to that. And it looks like this might be a sea change for all of us, where maybe potentially our personal lives, our personal relationships, our home life, our communities, our in-person relationships might supersede any identity of career as just how we understand ourselves to be leading meaningful lives. Could you speak about that for a little bit?
I think you're right. It is my hope that is something that we'll be able to cultivate. I take some solace or confidence from studies. The book by the name of The Weirdest People in the World, if I'm not messing it up, talks about this at length, and he points out that everything that you described is a very Western and modern phenomena. Hi, I'm Daniel, I'm a doctor. I'm a teacher, I'm a whatever it is. So our identity is enmeshed with our profession, and it seems impossible to tease them apart. But in huge parts of the world, that's just not true. In Asia and in Latin America and in Africa, you're more likely to be, hey, I'm Daniel, I'm a football fan. I'm Daniel, I have 3 kids. I love jazz. Any number of things that will identify you and which are actually more meaningful than I'm a lawyer, I'm a doctor, whatever. So humanity is capable of it. The West doesn't inculcate that, but humanity is capable of that. In general, my way of thinking about this, somewhat rigid perhaps, but is that first things first, we have to make sure that the riches, the abundance that AI can unleash is shared, if not evenly, at least equitably. I'm quite preoccupied by the notion that nobody should be left behind. There's going to be so much abundance that everybody should be able to live at a kind of first tier of the Maslow scale. Everyone should be taken care of. I think that is a precondition for what comes next. And it doesn't do that in and of itself, which is then, okay, if we can take care of that, because if people are hungry or the fears of unemployment of today come true, then there's no point in discussing meaning and how you introduce yourself. You can't feed your family. But if we can take care of that, and I think at least economically can work out, hopefully our politicians will figure it out as well, then you've got to build the next floor up, which is, okay, how do we really bring it to reality, those ancient visions of a utopia where we know how to use our time well? And that would be no less of a challenge. It's a huge challenge. And I think to the extent that we can see that coming and prepare our kids for it and look forward to it with optimism, identify that the future, while daunting and different, could also be dreamy and amazing and meaningful, then hopefully we'll get there.
Amazing. Daniel Shreiber, thank you so much for your time.
Amazing to be with you.
Isn't Daniel awesome? Now I want to hear from you. What was your key takeaway? Are you worried about AI, or are you kind of excited about this potential future? Do you have questions that you'd like me to follow up on in future content? Do you have stories and anecdotes about how AI has replaced someone in your life or been useful to you, like the one I shared about me getting kind of therapy from it? I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Just make sure to keep them respectful. And if instilling curiosity, going offline, being tech-free, building those face-to-face relationships, and creating a sense of a meaningful life even without a potential job in the future is something that you're concerned about and you want more support on, make sure to join the studio. Inside the studio, I teach you how to build a meaningful family culture, how to create a strong, resilient family, and a home life that brings so much joy and connection for you, your children, and your greater community. I continue to believe, and in some ways believe even more after that conversation with Daniel, that our families are the most meaningful projects of our life. No job or career or work could ever replace the meaning and the potential that we find in the fulfillment and purpose of family relationships and family culture. Remember, how we shape the future is by raising the next generation. So if that's something you want to be on board with, then make sure to join the studio at hifam.com/studio. Meanwhile, make sure to click the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and share this conversation with a friend who's also a bit worried about AI. I'll see you in the next one.